Best would be if you take these questions in form of a test. Try to attempt them within 8 minutes. Note down your answers and only then you listen to the discussion. I would work with the assumption that you have taken the test within the stipulated time and now you're listening to the discussion. There's an article in the Indian Express, Wheat Output and Inflation. Based on the article, I have this practice question for you. Wheat is a rabi crop and grain filling in wheat crop occurs at temperature up to 35 degrees Celsius. Way back in 2013, UPSC has asked this question. Consider the following crops. Which of these are kharif crops? Wheat is the most important rabi crop in India. Wheat would not be in the answer. Cotton, groundnut and rice, they are kharif crop. It must be well known to you that wheat is a rabi crop. You must also be following in the newspaper that production of wheat consistently increased till 2020-2021. And then there was a dip. The marginal decrease in the wheat production was because of the effect of heat waves. Heat waves take the temperature more than 37 degrees Celsius. The grain filling, meaning the filling of the grain of wheat with nutrient, that happens at higher temperature. That's why good 45 days should be higher temperature. But higher temperature is relative to the temperature during which the wheat crop is sown. So 30 to 35 degrees Celsius is higher temperature. And grain filling will not happen beyond 37 degrees Celsius. That will result in crop failure. So the statement is absolutely correct. Wheat is a rabi crop, and for grain filling or for higher productivity, the temperature should not increase 35 degrees Celsius. The next statement is India is self-sufficient in wheat production and does not import wheat. Self-sufficiency means the production is greater than equal to consumption. And you know that wheat production has been consistently increasing in last few years, except for this minor dip in 2021-2022. You must also know that India is the second largest wheat producer in the world. UPSC in the past has asked India's position with regard to production and import of important grains and important crops. In 2019, UPSC has asked among the following which one is the largest exporter of rice in the world in the last 5 years, and that is India. UPSC in 2018 has asked the quantity of imported edible oils is more than the domestic production of edible oils in last 5 years. This is factual and correct statement. And if you look at statement number 2, the government does not impose any custom duty on all the imported edible oils as a special case. From the psychological perspective, it looks a little extreme statement and this is incorrect. There are many edible oils on which government imposes very high duties. But the point is, you must know where India stands in terms of production and in terms of import for important crops. So India indeed is self-sufficient in wheat production, but that does not mean that India will not import wheat. Even in the crops where country is self-sufficient, still import will happen for many reasons. For instance, the import could be because of quality. Some of the processing units in South India, they import because they require higher quality grain. They could also import because importing from a neighboring country could be nearby. If a wheat mill in Tamil Nadu had to procure wheat from Punjab, that would be more cumbersome than importing it from Sri Lanka. If you look at this graph, you would understand that India does import wheat, although it is very, very minor, negligible, as you can see. In most of the years, the import is very minor, but there are some years where import reaches to a peak. For instance, in 2006, the import was very high. Again in 2016, the import was very high. These are the years where the crop failure happened or the supply chain disruption happened. But largely, if you see, in most of the years, the wheat import is very, very less. But still it happens for the want of quality. And once in a decade, something happens when the import shoots up. So to say that India does not import wheat sounds incorrect. And indeed, the statement is incorrect. Happy seeder zero tillage equipment is used for sowing of wheat in standing rice stubbles. See, you already have seen in discussion that rice is a kharif crop. Rice is actually the most dominant kharif crop of India. And look at discussion of 2022. Among the following crops, which one is the most important anthropogenic source of both methane and nitrous oxide? And the answer here is rice. The reason is A, rice is the dominant kharif crop, and B, The cropping season for Rabi crop, for example wheat, is very small. It has a span of around 4 months. So the farmers are in hurry burry. Once they have harvested the Kharif crop, they have to get the field ready. Because I have told you, if you don't get 45 days of high temperature, then the grain filling will not happen. So you have no time. So how do you prepare the field for the next crop wheat quickly? You burn the residue. You burn the stubble. UPSC in 2020 has asked this question: what are the advantages of zero tillage in agriculture? Zero tillage means you will not mix up the soil. You will not kind of prepare it in a traditional way where the upper and the lower layers are mixed and the field is prepared for the next sowing of crop. You won't do anything like that. And that is actually called tillage, so you won't do tillage, that is zero tillage. Sowing of wheat is possible without burning the residue of previous crop. And that previous crop in context of northern India is rice. So without clearing the field, you can directly sow the seed. So direct planting of paddy seeds in the wet soil is possible. This option is also correct. And because you're not doing tillage, so that also helps the cause of carbon sequestration. The answer is option D, meaning zero tillage is for wheat to be sown after the paddy field has been harvested. And one of the equipment to do zero tillage is happy seeder. Happy seeder is a modified form of traditional tractor where you cut the rice crop after harvesting it and at the same time you keep sowing the wheat seed. So happy seeder zero tillage equipment is used for sowing of wheat in standing rice stubbles. This is the geography of wheat crop. This is economy. This is environment and science and technology. The answer here is option C. There was another article in the Indian Express, The Worker, the Outsider. This article has been written from the point of view of migrant workers' rights. UPSC often asks about legislations with regard to social welfare. For example, in 2018, UPSC has asked a question on National Food Security Act 2013. The first statement said that the families coming under the category of BPL, only they are eligible. The statement is incorrect. Actually, the coverage overall would be two-thirds. Two-thirds of the population will be covered under National Food Security Act 2013. Around 75% of rural India and around 50% of urban India. The eldest woman in a household of age 18 years or above, they shall be considered as the head of the household for the purpose of giving the ration card. This is a factual and this is absolutely correct statement. Government of India through various schemes is trying to promote leadership among females in the household setup. The third statement talks about the right of pregnant women and lactating mothers to take home ration of 1600 calories per day. You know that UPSC has got into the habit of giving wrong data. And it was really confusing. Because if you have idea of calories, if you do exercise and keep track of your calorie intake, you would know that women generally require around 2000 calories per day. So lactating mothers require around 2200 calories per day. So it sounds reasonable that Government of India is contributing 1600 calories per day. But this is incorrect. Actually, it's only 600 calories. Because the benefit of 6000 per month for 6 months after delivery is also attached in this scheme. But anyhow, if you remove option 1, you are left to choose between 2 and 3. And since 2 is a very highlighted point, if you know the scheme, you would know that's a correct statement. So you would go with option B. Now come to this practice question. Consider the following statements regarding the Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1979. Since the policy on migrant workers, that's still at the draft stage. So this is the most important legislation that governs the rights of migrant worker. The act applies to every establishment in which 5 or more interstate migrant workers are employed or were employed in any day of the preceding 12th month. Man, this is factual statement. You have to know the basic provisions of this legislation, and this is correct. Employers are required to obtain a license before recruiting migrant workers. This is also correct. And license is given based upon the fact whether the employer is providing equal wage as the locals, is providing displacement allowances, and also the journey allowances. If you look in the Act, there's a Chapter 5 that deals with wages, welfare, and other facilities to be provided to interstate migrant workers. And in that, there are allowances like displacement allowances, journey allowances, and there are other facilities mentioned. These allowances are to be given by the contractor. And in order to get the license, these criteria must be fulfilled. The Act mandates that the wage to be paid to interstate migrant workmen shall be at par with the wages of local workmen. This seems very reasonable and it's a correct statement. Answer here is option D. The Hindu carried this article on page number 1. Same-sex union can rock societal values. You know that center has been dithering in Supreme Court. They are not willing to accept the concept of marriage for same-sex couples. Late evening yesterday, you might also have read that Supreme Court has referred this issue to a constitutional bench. In 2019, UPSC has asked which article of the Constitution of India safeguards one's right to marry the person of one's choice. Making your decision is part of your dignity. Dignity to human beings come by their ability to make decision, and dignity is part of Article 21. But the thing is, if that's a fundamental right to marry the person of one's choice, then the question is, what if you have a choice to marry a person of same sex as you? So now let's jump to this question. Which of the following rights is enjoyed by same-sex couple in India presently? Right to privacy, right to lawfully marry, right to adopt a child, right to inheritance of property by offspring. See, the story begins from here. In 2017, Supreme Court gave Puttaswamy judgment, and that was picked by UPSC in the mains exam. Examine the scope of fundamental rights in the light of latest judgment of the Supreme Court on right to privacy. In the right to privacy judgment, in the Puttaswamy judgment, Supreme Court declared right to privacy as a fundamental right protected under Indian Constitution. It was also declared that this right stems from fundamental right to life and liberty. The question was how the scope of fundamental right will be enhanced. And this is how it got enhanced. After Puttaswamy judgment came Navtej Johar judgment. In this judgment, Supreme Court said that family, marriage, procreation, and sexual orientation are all integral to the dignity of the individual. Above all, the privacy of the individual recognizes an inviolable right to determine how freedom shall be exercised. There are further implications of this judgment, but as part of this judgment, Article 377 of IPC that used to make sex or the marriages with persons of same gender punishable. This section was struck down. So Supreme Court effectively decriminalized Section 377. So it effectively made gay sex legal. Now hold it here. You must also know that Supreme Court via various judgment has considered living together, the living relation, at par with marriage. And courts presume that if a couple has been living together for a longer term, then they are lawfully wedded couples. So the concept of marriage, it has been changed by the court. Live-in relation, they are lawfully considered as marriage. And the child that comes out of it, that child will have the right to inheritance as well. So the family code, the Hindu Marriage Act, it will all apply on them. The Domestic Violence Act, it also applies to the couple living in the live-in relation. So family, marriages, procreation, sexual orientation, it's all coming under right to privacy. That's how the Puttaswamy judgment has changed the scope of fundamental rights. But as you understand from the article, that center is not willing to bring the same-sex marriage within the ambit of definition of marriage in Indian law. Because in the Navtej Johar judgment, gay sex was legalized, but the judgment was silent on marriage. The marriage registration is still not done. So they cannot marry lawfully. If they cannot marry, they can also not adopt a child. Here I must also remind you that couples living in live-in relation, if a child comes out of their interaction, then the child will have the right to inheritance. But the couple as such do not have the right to adopt a child. Right to adopt a child is also not there with live-in relation couples. And there is no question of same-sex couple having the right because they can't even register their marriage lawfully. So there is absolutely no question of inheritance of property by offspring because nothing is registered, neither the marriage nor the child. So the answer here would be option A. Why ISRO brought a satellite back into Earth's atmosphere? Because in future that's the only course of action. You must have recently read that experts and dignitaries have written an open letter that was published in Outer Space Institute. They are urging for national and multilateral effort to restrict uncontrolled re-entries of satellites. This is what can happen in uncontrolled re-entries, and the damage could be huge. especially in the context of increasing number of satellites in the orbit. Presently, there are more than 6,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, and with increasing requirement of mapping and Internet of Things, data procurement, and more communication, the satellites are only going to increase exponentially in the space. Either they are going to create havoc up or they are going to fly down like anything, destroying the life and property on Earth. So here's the question. Consider the following statements with reference to controlled re-entry of satellites. Controlled re-entry of satellite into Earth's atmosphere is preferred from geostationary or geosynchronous orbit. You understand that geostationary orbit is far away, around 36,000 km away from Earth's surface, and low Earth orbits are nearby, 600 to 800 km. And if you want to do controlled re-entry, then your engine has to be on. So to come in a controlled manner this long a distance, you will require enormous amount of fuel. So first you have to send that amount of fuel in the satellite. So even at the end of its life, it still has so much of fuel that it can come down such a long distance back on surface in a controlled manner. That will make any mission financially prohibitive. So controlled re-entries are done for low Earth orbits, not for geostationary or geosynchronous orbits. The Liability Convention 1972 requires countries to perform controlled re-entry of satellites. The Liability Convention of 1972 requires countries to pay for damages, but there is no provision for preventing the damage, meaning having controlled re-entries. There is no legal architecture presently. There is no convention at all for controlled re-entry of satellite. This is also absolutely incorrect statement. But this concept of controlled re-entry must not be a new one for you. In 2022, UPSC has asked a question on fractional orbital bombardment system. What is this? It's a missile put in a stable orbit around the Earth and it deorbits over a target on the Earth. It is there in a stable orbit and from there it will start deorbiting. This is controlled re-entry. From knowledge of your school, you know that frictional force is proportional to velocity. If you allow the satellite to come down fast, it will burn out in the atmosphere. But if you bring it down slowly, it will survive. So you can do the controlled re-entry of a satellite to burn it out, or you can do the controlled re-entry of a missile to target any position on the Earth. But the concept, by and large, the physics behind it remains the same. There's another article in the Hindu, The Rise of ESG Regulation. This regulation is from SEBI, and UPSC does ask about the regulations or the directives given by the regulators. Regulatory body is written in your syllabus of GS Paper 2. UPSC in 2019 has asked discussion regarding the directive given by RBI, Storage of Payment System Data. It was also called as Data Diktat. The directive was to ensure that the payment system providers, they store all the data relating to payment systems operated by them only in India. And this was the crux of the directive of local data storage. If you read statement 2, you will get a sense that it is incorrect statement. It says that the directive asks to ensure that the systems are owned and operated by public sector enterprises. That goes against the concept of minimum government and maximum governance. They shall submit the Consolidated System Audit Report to CAG by the end of the calendar year. This is a completely imaginary statement very smartly framed by UPSC. When you solve previous year's question paper, try to see how UPSC makes a statement incorrect. What exactly it does. Now coming to discussion, which of the following regulatory bodies in India has introduced a new reporting requirement called the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report? This directive has been given by SEBI, Security and Exchange Board of India.